So he invites us to look at some of these presuppositions of science. And he says, remember that each one has been rejected by various scholars, even if it seems to be common sense. Again, the lovely thing about philosophy is sometimes you can make a bold statement like objective truth is certainly the case, and someone will disagree with you on it. Thus, the need to defend these presuppositions, again, a philosophical and not a scientific endeavor, he says, is no merely theoretical matter. It's important. It's something that needs to be done. It's probably every generation must butt up against it because it wants to rebel against the hard truths of the world, because we do live in God's domain, and science is the way in which God has ordered the universe, and we must use philosophy, which is how God thinks, and we tend to slaughter both those things in the name of idolatry.
Good. And so again, the issue here is these foundational pillars, these presuppositions, these assumptions about science. Some are doubted and some are dismissed. Some, philosophers and scientists don't hold to them. And so they must be argued for one way or against. Well, this arguing for or against these foundations, these presuppositions, are philosophical endeavors and not scientific, right? So that's kind of what he's trying to get at here. So as we mentioned here, he's going to give us several of these presuppositions of science that science itself cannot justify. So these are claims, these are presuppositions, these are assumptions that hold up science, allows the scientific enterprise to take place, but they cannot be justified by the methodology of science. And so how are they justified? Well, they have to be argued for philosophically, right? So that's the issue. So what's the first one? Well, number one, a world exists out there, right, independent of mind, language, or theory. All right. So notice, in order to do science, you have to believe or assume that you're looking at a world that's out there, one would claim, right? Now, obviously, what he's going to show here is that some people don't believe that. Correct. Right. And so that has to be argued for. But science is looking at and examining and doing experiments and so forth with a world that's actually out there, independent of just what's in our mind or how our language or theory, portrays it. And so he tells us that large swaths of the human family who subscribe to certain forms of things like Hinduism, Buddhism, and other Eastern religions take the external world to be a mere illusion. So those folks you have to argue with philosophically in order to get them to see that there is indeed a mind-independent world that's out there.
Well, there can't be that many people of them. Nothing like just over 1/6 of all humanity. So
a few billion or so.
Exactly.
So he tells us that what may surprise us, though, is that many Western intellectuals reject the assumption of metaphysical realism. This is the view that there's an external objective world that really does exist, quite independently of humans, our thinking, our speaking, referring to and theorizing and so forth, right? So in order to do science, you have to believe that you're doing science on something, and the something is the real world that exists independent of our mind, language, and theory. Well, there are people that argue against that there isn't a world like that exists, right? And so you have to do philosophical arguments in order to show that is, or perhaps is not the case.
Right. Well, and no one can legitimately argue that, right? I mean, it's just all something that we know. Whoever he's going to give an example is coming from some, unaccredited community college that is named after the sole person that is teaching the one class there. There's no way that any
community college by Fred.
No Ivy League scholar would ever make claims as preposterous.
Sounds ridiculous, even though there's no world out there.
All right, I poisoned the well enough. Well, the late Harvard philosopher Hilary Putnam, for example, argued that we should replace metaphysical realism with internal realism, the view that the notion of exists or doesn't exist applies only within a theory and has no legitimate application to some alleged theory-independent real world. And wow. the matrix hackles of my philosopher degrees have raised their heads, and this is where we watch at least the first movie. Well, the internal realist then, when asked if something really real exists outside a community narrative, will say, really, is being used in a very unclear, abandoned, modernist way. Can't do that. So the question should be disallowed. It is inappropriate because there's no such thing as a God's eye point of view that we can look down upon a world or a reality. Speaking of what is really real becomes nonsense. Do we mean the real world or the real world? Well, see, Neo, he goes outside into the real world, but then he's able to use his powers in the real world. So is he in the real world, or is that world in and of itself not real? And so we're matrix within matrices.
Right, and now he gives us in the book, and I'm encouraging folks to look at it. He does give us several examples of this, of folks we would call highly educated or whatever that hold to these types of positions. Basically, Putnam is arguing that our language basically creates the world, right? That's what he's saying, and so that is going against the presupposition that a real world does exist. Now, what he's telling us and what he tells us over and over again, he's not going to take a position necessarily on these issues. What he's trying to show is that these issues are necessary for science and they have to be argued for or against philosophically. And that's what he's trying to get us to see here.
Right. One might argue that you must be highly educated in order to believe such bizarre concepts as this. So,
Yeah.